Ever get that feeling? Boarding a brand new plane.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, that sense of like
Cutting edge.
cutting edge technology. Yeah.
Going somewhere.
Taking you to a new destination.
Right.
Well, imagine that excitement turning to,
Uncertainty.
yeah, a nagging worry about safety. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people felt after those two Boeing 737 MAX 8 crashes, you know, tragically within months of each other.
Yeah.
So today we're going to go deep into that whole story.
The story behind the crashes.
The chain of events, the decisions.
It led to crisis.
Yeah, led to that whole crisis.
What's really fascinating to me is that it's not just some technical malfunction. It was really a cultural shift.
Within Boeing.
Within Boeing, this gradual erosion of
their commitment
to
safety above all else.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe considering their reputation, you know, like for decades.
Stellar reputation for safety.
They were known for prioritizing safety
over cost.
They
even delayed the 707 release because they needed to redesign the rudder, a critical rudder component.
Wow. So what happened?
Well, I think a major turning point was the 1997 merger with McDonnell Douglas.
Oh, okay.
This brought in a whole different style of leadership.
Okay.
One that was much more focused on cost cutting and shareholder value. And this really clashed with their engineering-driven roots.
Right. It was a big departure.
A significant departure.
Yeah. And
the guy who was leading this was Harry Stonecipher, a protege of Jack Welch.
Oh, wow.
Who was infamous for his laser focus on profit at General Electric.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, that must have created some friction.
Oh, I'm sure.
And you can actually see this clash of values in a hedge fund memo that was circulating within Boeing at the time. And it basically said...
What did it say?
To stop being so focused on the plane itself.
Wow.
And start thinking about shareholder returns.
Oh, wow.
And the engineers were... Outraged.
They were probably like, we build machines that carry hundreds of people.
Exactly.
It's people's lives.
Yeah, and this ultimately led to this huge event. The engineer strike of 2000.
Wow.
Over 23,000 engineers.
Oh, my God.
Walked off the job.
That's incredible.
It was unprecedented.
Yeah.
And their slogan was, no nerds, no birds.
That's catchy.
Which perfectly captures it, right?
It does.
Their commitment to the core identity of Boeing.
To safety.
Yeah, there's this amazing story about this engineer, Stan Sorcerer, and he stood alone at first, waiting for others to join him.
Oh.
And then they just all came pouring out chanting,
no nerds, no birds.
No nerds, no birds.
That's a powerful image.
A really powerful image.
It really shows how deeply they cared about safety.
Yeah, that was a defining moment for Boeing.
It was.
They actually ended up conceding to some of the engineers' demands.
Okay.
But the relationship was never quite the same.
It's strained.
Yeah. And then soon after, they moved their headquarters.
Oh, yeah.
From Seattle to Chicago, which some people saw as a real symbolic move away
from those engineers.
Yeah.
So while all this was going on, what was Airbus doing?
Well, Airbus was gaining ground. They were introducing the A320, which had this revolutionary autopilot system.
Oh, wow.
And you had airlines like JetBlue starting to favor it.
Okay.
So Boeing was dealing with all this internal stuff and trying to launch this ambitious new plane, the Dreamliner.
The Dreamliner, that was supposed to be revolutionary, wasn't it?
It was. They wanted to make it incredibly cost efficient.
Right.
So they outsourced a huge chunk of the design and manufacturing.
And that was a problem.
Well, it led to some real challenges.
Like what?
You know, engineers were reporting substandard parts.
Wow.
Incomplete manuals. And basically, if they raised concerns, they were met with silence.
Wow.
Cynthia Cole, who was the union president at the time, she started collecting all these stories and holding town halls to try to raise the alarm.
So even though they poured billions into fixing it, they were still behind
schedule,
over budget, and facing that threat from Airbus.
Right. And Airbus then launched the A320neo, which had amazing fuel efficiency.
Oh, wow.
So Boeing felt immense pressure.
They had to respond. And
they came up with the 737 MAX.
Okay.
But instead of designing a whole new plane, they decided to revamp the aging 737.
Why would they do that?
Well, their biggest customer.
Who was that?
Southwest Airlines.
Okay.
They demanded a plane that didn't require pilot retraining.
Oh, I see.
So Boeing was kind of forced
to modify the existing design.
Yeah.
They were stuck.
Imagine the pressure.
Oh, yeah.
They had this countdown clock in their conference room, and they were told, keep changes minimal, prioritize speed.
Even if it meant
sacrificing.
A full redesign.
Full redesign, yeah.
So this whole pressure cooker environment,
yeah.
It sounds like that was a recipe for disaster.
It really was.
Yeah. It sounds like they were trying to fit a square peg in a round hole,
Yeah.
by just modifying the 737 instead of starting from scratch.
Right.
So did any of those design choices actually contribute to the problems with the MAX?
I think one of the biggest issues stemmed from the engines.
The engines.
Yeah, they installed these much larger, more fuel-efficient engines on the 737 MAX.
Right.
But because of the size and where they had to place them, it actually changed the aerodynamics of the plane.
So just adding bigger engines changed how it handled in the air.
Exactly. In certain flight conditions, the plane's nose could pitch up too much.
Oh, wow.
Which could lead to a stall.
Right.
So to fix that, Boeing's engineers developed a software system. It's called MSIN.
MCS, right.
Yeah, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about that.
Yeah.
What was it supposed to do?
Basically, it would automatically push the plane's nose down.
Okay.
If it sensed the angle of attack was too high.
So it was preventing a stall.
Yeah, it was supposed to work in the background.
Okay.
Just making small adjustments.
So it sounds like a good thing.
It sounds like a safety feature.
Right, so what went wrong?
Well, there were several flaws in how they implemented it. First, it relied on data from just one sensor.
One sensor.
Yeah, which meant it was a single point of failure.
Oh, I see.
So if that sensor malfunctioned, MCS could activate incorrectly.
And push the nose down.
When it didn't need to.
So just one faulty sensor could cause all these problems.
Potentially, yeah.
Wow.
And to make matters worse,
oh no,
MCS was really powerful. It could repeatedly override the pilot's controls. Yeah, so even if they tried to pull up, MCS could keep pushing the nose down.
So it'd be really hard to regain control.
Extremely difficult, and
I think I remember reading that they didn't even tell the pilots about this.
Yeah, you're right.
First.
Initially, they didn't fully disclose MCS to the pilots.
Why?
They argued it was a background safety system that pilots wouldn't encounter normally.
But it could override their controls.
Yeah.
And they didn't tell them.
It seems crazy now, right?
It does.
But remember, they were under a lot of pressure.
To deliver the plane.
Yeah, and they promised Southwest.
No retraining.
No pilot retraining.
Right.
So any changes could have triggered that.
Yeah.
Costing them time and money.
So they cut corners.
It seems like it.
With tragic consequences. So the MAX went into service.
Right.
And then those flaws we talked about, they had devastating consequences.
They did.
Tell me about the first crash.
So on October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 crashed shortly after takeoff from Jakarta.
Tragic.
Yeah, all 189 people on board were killed.
It was a brand new plane too, wasn't it?
It was, just a few months old.
What did the investigation find?
They concluded that a faulty angle of attack sensor triggered MCS.
Right.
And it repeatedly forced the nose down.
Even though the pilots tried to.
They tried to regain control, but they couldn't.
How did Boeing respond?
Well, at first, they defended MCS.
Really?
Yeah, they blamed the airline.
And the pilots.
And the pilots. They said the system was working as designed. And that trained pilots should have been able to handle it.
But then a few months later, another crash.
On March 10th, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed shortly after takeoff, Addis Ababa.
Wow.
And all 157 people on board were killed.
Another new MAX.
Another brand new 737 MAX.
That must have been alarming.
It was. The similarities between the crashes were just too much to ignore. This time, the evidence was overwhelming.
That it was MCS.
Yeah, and the world finally realized how dangerous
the MAX was.
Yeah.
What happened to Boeing then?
Well, the 737 MAX was grounded.
Worldwide.
Worldwide.
Wow.
It was a huge fall from grace.
Yeah.
For a company that was known for safety.
It sent shockwaves, I bet.
Through the whole industry.
Yeah.
And it raised serious questions about corporate responsibility.
About the FAA.
Regulatory oversight.
Right.
And the human cost of cutting corners.
It was a watershed moment.
It was. For Boeing. And the whole industry.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's not the end of the story.
Not at all. The investigations that followed uncovered some really disturbing things.
About Boeing.
About Boeing.
I'm sure they had a long way to go to regain trust.
A very long way.
So let's get into that in part 3. That grounding must have been a huge blow to Boeing.
It was. I mean, financially, they lost billions.
Yeah.
From the grounding compensation to the airlines.
Right.
Legal settlements.
Yeah, with the families.
And their reputation.
Yeah, I was going to say, forget the money. What about the reputation?
They went from
being the gold standard.
Yeah, safety and innovation.
To being associated with tragedy.
Exactly.
Wow.
So rebuilding trust was
a top priority.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about those investigations? What did they find?
Well, Congress got involved.
Yeah.
Regulatory probes, and they uncovered this pattern of behavior that was really troubling.
Like what?
Well, for one, they found that Boeing kind of downplayed the significance of MCS.
To the FAA?
During the certification process.
So they weren't totally honest about
capability.
Yeah, like how powerful it was.
Exactly. They said it was a minor system.
That didn't need much training.
Yeah, no extensive pilot training needed.
But we know.
Oh, we know.
That wasn't true.
That wasn't the whole story.
It could override the pilots.
Right, and they didn't fully communicate that.
What about inside Boeing? Did they find anything about their culture?
Yeah, internal communication showed that some employees had actually raised concerns about MCS while they were developing it.
Wow.
Some even called it egregious.
Wow.
Scary.
But nobody listened.
It seems like those warnings were ignored.
It's crazy to think that these red flags were right there.
Yeah, and just disregarded.
So what does that say about their culture?
Well, it seems like there was this culture of silence. About safety.
Yeah.
Was maybe discouraged.
To prioritize other things.
Deadlines.
Cost cutting.
Yeah.
What about the FAA? What was their role in all this?
Right. The FAA is supposed to oversee safety.
Right.
But the investigations found that they had delegated too much authority.
To Boeing.
Yeah.
So Boeing was basically
self-certifying.
Wow,
some aspects of the MAX.
That's a big problem.
It's a huge oversight issue.
Yeah.
And because of that, both Boeing and the FAA faced a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, I bet.
Calls for reforms.
To the whole system.
To the certification process to make sure it was more independent and rigorous.
Yeah. So what happened to the MAX itself? Did it ever fly again?
It did, but only after a long grounding.
Okay.
And Boeing made a lot of changes.
Not what?
They redesigned MCS, made it less aggressive.
Okay.
And they made it rely on multiple sensors.
Instead of just one.
Right. No more single point of failure.
And they had to train the pilots.
Yeah, mandatory training programs.
Specifically on MCS.
So pilots really understood it.
And knew what to do.
If something went wrong.
So they made all these changes.
Schedule changes.
To fix the problems.
Yeah.
And the MAX did eventually.
Return to service.
But it was a long road.
It was, after rigorous testing.
Yeah.
And a lot of scrutiny.
From everyone.
Yeah.
Wow, what a story.
It really shows how important safety is.
In any industry, but especially...
Especially aviation.
Yeah, when lives are at stake.
It can't be overstated.
This whole deep dive has been fascinating.
Yeah.
A little bit sobering, to be honest.
It is a sobering story.
Yeah, but thank you for explaining it all.
It's been my pleasure.
And for highlighting those lessons learned.
It's important to learn from this.
So it doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
And to our listeners, keep digging into this.
Yeah, we have some resources.
We have some great resources for you.
Check them out.
To learn more and stay safe out there.
Safe travels.
Thanks for joining us.